Look at these beautiful vehicles. I'd love to have the keys to each and every one of them. Well, maybe not entirely. If you don't do your research, you're going to find out that you might have a real piece of junk on your hands, whether it's weak engines, bad materials, zero quality control, and it may not last very long because it's got such a bad, poorly designed, built, or functioning engine. And I want to share a list of 5 vehicles with the worst engines that you're going to want to avoid because they're so unreliable. As a matter of fact, I created part 1 to this video a while back. You're definitely going to want to stick around for this. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. So the first one on my list is what's behind me right here, and it's the BMW 750, but it's not just the 750, it's any 50, 550, 650, or the X5 50i or X6 50i, really essentially anything with the N63, which is the 4.4 liter twin turbo V8. Now, later generations got slightly improved, there were upgrades to hardware and cooling, but the earlier generations were a significant problem. Now, they made a lot of power, so they are fun to drive, don't get me wrong. The N63 puts down the jam. The S63 in the M versions are even better. But there's a lot of issues with this particular engine. We don't even care at this point all the electrics that fail on these cars, from heads-up display to control modules, window regulators. Those are irrelevant compared to what you find under the hood. And since we're talking about engines, right, what you can get are stretch timing chains. Too much load on them and they start to stretch out. They get too much slack, and also couple that with the fact that poor chain ramps mean the crumbling ramps and the excessive play in the chain means you can get that rattle noise on startup. And in a worst case scenario, an outright failure, and you get the valve to piston smack, and then it's all over. But the crying, you're facing yourself a huge bill, $15,000, $20,000. You also have leaking injectors. Of course, there's 8 cylinders, 8 injectors. Sometimes they're known to leak down. If they start filling the cylinders, keep cranking. I dare you. No, I don't. I'm just kidding. Because if you keep cranking and the vehicle's flooded and you keep pumping fuel in there, or you have a leaking down injector, you start washing the cylinders, you no longer have oil in there, and then you have zero compression. You definitely won't start, and actually you can cause further damage to the cylinder walls or the piston rings themselves. And then you also have the common cooling on both sides of the engine. And the worst part with that is if you suffer a failure on the turbos, it could result in overheating of the heads, which results in, of course, valve guide seals melting down, and then you wind up with excessive oil consumption. And virtually all of these N63 engines saw pretty severe oil consumption, some a lot worse than others. And it even made it to BMW's personal customer care to try to provide some extra benefit for the customers because it was just getting out of hand. Too much oil consumption, $15 a quart, it just gets ridiculous. That then it can also lead to variable valve control issues, camshaft failures, and honestly, it just can be a whole ball of big repairs. The engine's way too complex, and a catastrophic failure is sitting on a knife's edge. And what do we have here? It's an A4. That's right, these are beautiful little cars from a time when they were small, stout, and fun to drive. But it's a 2.5 liter V6 TDI that was the problem area. Of course, they were very tempting, great drivetrain in terms of amazing grunt out of the hole, but there were some problems. How about the EGR valve system? Of course, camshafts were low on lubrication, and what that meant was often you'd have to replace or do a top-end rebuild with some of these EGR valves plugging off. The injection pumps were a problem, and they're very, very expensive and kind of a pain to do as well. And of course, we had a dual mass flywheel issue with some of these. And what would a turbocharged car be without the odd turbocharged replacement? That's right, that was a problem too. And what is it going to cost you? $2,500 to do a new turbo? Yeah, they were problematic. They were fun when they were running, but outside of warranty, look out. The 2.5 liter V6 TDI. And the next one on the list is the 3.6 liter V6 by General Motors. Right here we have a Cadillac SRX, but you can find that engine in a lot of vehicles, from the Camaro to the Equinox and the Impala. We can't forget about other caddies, for example, like the ATS, the CTS. Yes, there are numerous vehicles that share that V6 3.6 liter unit. And while it's a spry, energetic little unit tucked under the hood right there, the problem is there's a host of issues with it. One being excessive oil consumption. GM says they're okay with 1 quart per 2,000 miles on there. Personally, I say that's way too much, and most other customers would agree with me. You should even really have to top up your oil between oil services, which is in that 8,000 to 12,000 mile range. But really, why are we adding so much oil to these particular drivetrains? It just seems to be prominent with that unit. So how do you know you've got too low oil? Well, the low oil sensor warning comes on. Also keeping an eye on the oil if you're down over a quart every 2,000 miles, that's part of it. And as well, camshaft sensor engine code is part of an issue that creeps in there. And that's mainly because oil pressure is required to operate the cam timing. And of course, if that's low on oil, then of course it's not going to function right now, will it? And because it's a timing chain, not a timing belt, there's a metal cover over it, and it's sandwiched in such a position that it generates excessive heat. And then of course, the gasket starts to dry up. And then of course, you get some oil consumption from the timing chain cover. And another problem that these engines see is not uncommon with a lot of BMWs, for example, as well, and maybe some Audis, is the timing chain failure outright. Timing chain synchronizes the time, fuel and air in, intake valve open, goes in there, close, compression, boom, and then the exhaust valve, out goes the stinky air. That's how it's technically all supposed to work. But when that chain is out of sync, valves don't always open all the way with synchronization. And of course, if the chain breaks altogether, hey, that's a big problem. That's called big, expensive engine repairs. And other than this being a clunky looking vehicle, it's a clunking running vehicle as well. Odd noises front end as well. But most importantly, engine related, again, we have further problems, and that's water pump. Water pump starts to break down between 80, 90, 100,000 miles. And then fortunately, there's a little pee hole or a weep hole, if you will, that once it starts letting go, it starts to telltale and you get a little bit of coolant dripping out of there. And it's basically there to tell you and give you an advance warning that it's on its way out and it's time to get that changed as soon as possible. So at the end of the day, the 3.6 liter GM plugged into many, many vehicles, but sadly, there's many, many problems. And unfortunately, another engine that's going to be very, very problematic, of course, it's what's tucked under the hood of this brand new, well, it's a 2020 Kia Soul. Sadly, there's been a strong history lately. NHTSA just asked them. Lots of issues with recalls, engine problems, and fires. Here we're looking at the 2-liter NU MPI engine. That's right. These are a problem through and through. Yeah, they're kind of cute. I mean, look, I love the red touch there and the alternating color up top. You have red there on this beautiful Soul. Of course, they also have the Volvo style rear tail lights. Vertical, love that look of this new Kia. Of course, go down the side. It definitely has a sporting look to it. Very, very cute. Nice little accents around there and really amazing looking front end. I love the new headlight design on there. How about that projector? How about that great little grille? Absolutely beautiful new design. But it's really unfortunate because there's already a story of somebody doing 70 miles an hour down the freeway. All of a sudden, check engine light came on, they pulled over and it burst into flames and they jumped out. Now there's actually NHTSA is addressing this particular engine because they're saying there is an engine issue with the piston rings. Of course, there's 4 pistons in this particular car, and it's the piston rings on each piston that they're saying is the issue. They're saying the piston oil rings may not have been properly heat treated, which may actually result in an engine damage. Not just damage, but even catastrophic fail at times. Of course, I don't know about you, but I want no part of being behind the wheel of something that could spontaneously combust. Never mind that particular engine. A lot of the engines recent years, of course, in the Kia Soul have had a problem with igniting. Of course, there's lots of stories. Do a recall search on Google and you'll find lots of them. And a lot of them have to do with Kia and Hyundai and the Kia Soul specifically, where what was happening with some of them in the earlier models, you were getting filings coming out in part of the manufacturing process, landing within the lubrication holes of the crankshaft, plugging them off, creating hot spots, and then ultimately causing either rod bearings to spin, burn, seize, and of course, resulting in a massive catastrophic failure. I don't know about you, I don't think they quite got that nailed just yet. And right here we have another glorious BMW on the list. Now this is actually the later version, and this replaced the one that we're really talking about that carries the beautiful diesel called the N47 engine. That's right, it's a turbo 4-cylinder and it has problems, big problems, the kind of problems that can cost you the entire value of that car. Well, we all know that diesels are great on fuel and diesels do rattle a little bit. That's what they do. But the older N47 version actually now has been under class action lawsuit. Many customers have been very dissatisfied with the engine once they see that catastrophic failure. Now, of course, they're great until that point. Once that happens, it's all over but the crying. As I said, this is the replacement version, but the older version that carried the 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder diesel engine was pretty stout, pretty reliable, fuel efficient, and was very sporty to drive. The problem was, the way that engine was mounted, the timing gear was at the back of the engine, at the firewall. So you couldn't even preemptively change the timing chain. But the problem was that timing chain was very, very common to fail. And once it failed, you either went to limp mode or the timing chain stretched and snapped altogether, and then you became another victim of a catastrophic BMW engine failure. Now, sadly, do you see the trend? BMW has had a few issues with their timing chains. The N20, that's their gas jobby, 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engine, that had timing chains go, but that was because the guides got sloppy, the materials broke down, and then the chain skipped the cog. Then you had a catastrophic failure. The N63, stretched timing chains, and the occasional catastrophic failure there too. It is a problem. Now, it's not only a BMW issue, there are other brands that are seeing stretched or broken timing chains, but just saying, that is one for the history books. And with all of that said, be sure to check out those 2 amazing videos. One, of course, is Avoid These Cars with the Worst Engines Part 1, as well as some great engines that will last forever. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon. Catch you then. Bye-bye.